What is going on, YouTube squad? Riley here today, bringing you a little swap up from our regular YouTube content. Today, I am going to be doing a tutorial / tips and tricks video on the Fire Giant and Ranked Conquest Smite. The reason why I chose to do the Fire Giant is because the Fire Giant fights are the moment in the game where most teams can either win or lose. It's a toss-up, and teams and players that do not know how to properly pull this objective or fight around it do end up losing games a lot more than teams and players that don't. So I'm just gonna hop right into it. So I think what I'm gonna do is just kind of give a roll-by-roll explanation on what each team should be doing. But first, before we do that, let's talk about why Fire Giant exists and what the point of it being in the game really is. So the point of the Fire Giant is basically to force fights. The Fire Giant is pretty much on the map for teams that are have an XP or gold lead on other teams to be able to sit here and do this objective, and it's basically forces the other team to have to either come and contest to not just let the other team get it, or they can choose to let the other team get it, and the other team's snowball will increase and increase, and they'll have an easier time sieging. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the support role and their job at FG. So typically, when a team pulls a Fire Giant, in most case scenarios, it is because they have a lead and they are either looking to fight the enemy team and to basically force a fight with the enemy team, or they are looking to just pretty much secure it and taking a next fight when they siege with their Fire Giant buff. So basically, supports, they have one of the harder jobs for FG. They have to kind of swap between this role of tanking it properly, which means that, like here, I'll show you. So after the Fire Giant hits twice, it has a knock-up hit, so they have to tank it properly. Make sure they don't drag that knock-up line to hit their backliners, because if backliners take a lot of poke during FG, it can be very, very detrimental if the other team forces a fight. So supports are going to make sure that, one, they know how to tank that chain properly, and that they do tank the Fire Giant, period. Because a lot of supports that I've seen, even my high-level games, they are allergic to walking up to the Fire Giant and autoing it first. The next big thing with supports is that they need to make sure that whenever they're, whenever you're standing at this range and these fire pool spawns that you see right there, those fire pools do a lot of damage. So if I have a jungler like Mercury that's burning the Fire Giant, I should not be standing on top of the Fire Giant when that fire pool spawns, because that's giving my Mercury less room to work with, and he's going to get poked a lot by those fire pools. It's a really bad support habit that a lot of supports have, where they tend to sit there and auto the FG for like 20 to 30 damage instead of like spacing themselves out and standing like here, for example, and zoning on the end of the Fire Giant. See how that fire pool spawns there instead of here, so now my Mercury can sit here and auto and not take damage. My autos really weren't doing any damage to it in the first place, so it's not like there's really even a reason for me to stand here and just auto the Fire Giant, in a sense. Supports can also have a zoning role in the Fire Giant. Pretty much depends on what your solo laner is. Some support gods are better at zoning than solo lane gods, and that's just something that you'll learn over time. Like a Sobek is a really good zoning character because he has his ult, which is an AoE slow. He has his pluck and he has his 2. But then there's also some supports that are really good at tanking FG, such as like Sylvanas, because they have those AoE heals and AoE brats that are really useful for the team. So the most important thing I want to be gathered from supports tanking FG is that they are going to need to know how to pull it properly, make sure that they're not getting their backliners hit with those fire pools and those knockups, and they also need to make sure that they are zoning properly. Up next, which I believe is the next most important FG role, is ADC. As an ADC, FG is very self-explanatory in a sense. The higher level up you get, the more harder these FG fights can become. But typically as an ADC, all you have to do during an FG fight is stand here and just DPS it. It's your job to do 100% of the Fire Giant's health bar, because you are the main damage to objectives and jungle bosses. The most important thing for ADCs is to, one, make sure you don't get hit by that knockup, because it is a lot of damage. And you aren't going to be lifestealing a bunch from the FG. You are going to be lifestealing a little bit, but not as much as, you know, from enemy gods or minions. The second most important thing is that if a team does decide to contest the Fire Giant, you need to have perfect active usage. A big part of ADC role, even when it comes outside of Fire Giant fights, like sieging, Gold Fury fights, even just regular like skirmishes in the jungle with enemy teams, is that if you don't have perfect active usage, you are going to throw the fight or game for your team. If I'm sieging a Phoenix as an ADC, and I get hit by a Thoth ult, and I have my Aegis up and I die, that's game. Like that very much hurts your team's chance at winning a game, especially that siege that you were taking, obviously, because if you're dead, you know, it's very difficult for your team to siege. Same thing with Fire Giant. If you were dead at a Fire Giant because you didn't use your actives, your team is going to have to back off, and the other team is going to take a fight more than likely, and you're just going to lose. So yes, you need to make sure, most importantly, that you have perfect active usage, which does take practice, but the best way you should look at it is if I'm pulling a Fire Giant, I'm pretty much going to be using my Aegis for big mage ult, or like if an assassin dives me, like let's say I get Thor dunked, I'm going to want to Aegis it or Beads Aegis it. Just go into that Fire Giant fight or a Fire Giant objective, period, just knowing what you're going to want to Beads and Aegis, just so you don't die and lose your team that skirmish by the FG. Up next is mid. I think that the hardest part about mid is objective secure, and a lot of people can disagree with me on this, maybe because they might be like slightly lower level players, because objective securing is easier the lower level you are. But in higher levels, FG securing for mid laners is very, very important. It is the most crucial part of the FG fight for them, and it also can be very challenging depending on if the enemy team knows when to go in. So let's say you're a Thoth, for example, and you're charging up your ult, which has a long cast time. You're going to find yourself your ult getting disrupted, so you're going to have to position perfectly. And what's so beautiful about mages is you don't actually have to be inside of the Fire Giant pit to do damage to the Fire Giant, right? If you have like Thoth, you can throw up your wall from the outside of the pit, and you can damage it from the outside. You don't have to sit there autoing the Fire Giant the whole entire time, which is what is so great about some of those long-range mages, like Ra, for example, or Thoth. Most mages can do it. But like I was saying earlier, you're going to have to position properly for your ultimate. So if I'm noticing that the FG is getting low, I might back off to back here with Thoth, so like a Sobek can't just blink on me and 2 me or 1 me and disrupt my ult. Because if they do that, and the other mid laner on the other team is like sitting here, they're gonna see that you're CC'd and they're gonna be able to out secure you, and they're gonna dump their ult on the FG, and that would not be good at all. The enemy team would get the FG. That wouldn't be very cool. So yeah, just as a mid laner, you also need active usage as well. So keep in mind your active usage and your positioning around securing the FG is very, 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 very important. Up next, we got solo lane, which is honestly the easiest FG job, I guess you could say. They have the easiest, honestly. They're pretty much going to zone. So like, let's just say right here is warded and right here is warded. Okay, so we're gonna see if the enemy is walking in right here or right here, because these two are warded. So that leaves this space open. Okay, so typically as a solo laner, I'm gonna be paying attention to where the wards are on my map. So like I said, I see those two right here, so I'm gonna see that this is an open spot, and I'm just gonna kind of stand right here. I'm gonna make sure that no one's walking up to it. If the mage tries to get in range of that ultimate, I'm gonna make sure that they can't, and I'm gonna make their life hell for walking up. Some solo laners can tank FG. It just kind of depends. Like, if you know the enemy team isn't going to contest because they're all dead, for example, or they just can't contest because they're just absolutely 100% going to lose the fight, then you can just sit on the fire and DPS it and maybe tank it instead of your support. But other than that, solo laner's job for FG is incredibly easy. And yeah, so junglers are very dynamic when it comes to FG fights. If you have something like a Nemesis or a Mercury, they can honestly stay on fire and burn it. If you got something like a Thor, you can kind of just like sit over here. Make sure you're on a non-warded position. So like, let's say I have a counter ward right here. I'm gonna Thor ult from here as soon as the FG is gonna start getting low, so that if the enemy team walks in, since that FG is getting in that steel threshold, I will be able to punish their engage with my re-engage on my Thor ult, or my Thana ult, or my Rat ult, etc. The biggest thing for junglers is to make sure that they don't overcommit while their team is pulling FG, and you need to be on the same page as your team, because you don't want to dive a backline while your team decides or calls that they're going to stick the Fire Giant, right? So yeah, that's very important. Let's talk about ward spots. So obviously you're going to want to have your FG warded, counter warded, so you know that the enemy team can't see the HPs easily. That's pretty self-explanatory, I think. One thing that I do notice that a lot of lower level players do is that they kind of like, let's say for example, we know that a Fire Giant fight is going to be in 30 seconds. Their backliners will walk up and counter ward and then run away, right? And then the enemy team support will walk up and counter ward and kill your ward, and it's like, no, like you have to play around that counter ward. You don't want the enemy team to just walk up and get your counter ward for free. And once you counter ward it, position around it. And if you can't position around it, then don't ward yet. If it's just you as an ADC here, just don't ward it. Wait for your support to come so he can stand up here and you can counter ward it. And so you can you can actually make sure that the enemy team doesn't just walk in and get your ward for free. So once you place that counter ward there, typically you're going to want to ward right here, pretty standard. Also, if you have enough wards, you can ward up here, ward high. Sometimes you can even ward low. If you have a jungler that you think is going to be playing from behind and then mid-wave isn't pushed up, like let's say your mid-wave's right here, it'd be a very good idea to ward somewhere like right here where I'm sitting, just to make sure that the enemy jungler doesn't walk in from behind. And like your mage is sitting right here, and let's say he's a Nem and he just autos, 2 autos, and your mage is dead. So ward coverage is very important. I think the last thing I can cover is if you're pulling an FG in a team contest, when should you secure and when should you fight? So this is something that's a very, 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 very important thing to think about, because a lot of teams, what they end up doing is they don't have the resources to hold on to it and try and secure it, so they end up losing the Fire Giant and losing the fight. As a player and a team, you need to be on the same page and make sure that you know what your team is going to do. So like typically if I'm in a ranked game, I will, I'll say attack Fire Giant, set up an ambush here, which basically means we're going to pull this fire, but as soon as they walk up, we're going to kill them, right? But in other case scenarios, let's say I have a Raw and an Uller, and my Raw has ult. There's no way an enemy team should be able to secure it, especially if a soul laner is zoning properly. So it's pretty safe to say that you could just stay on the Fire Giant and secure it. But typically it is the safer call, especially if your team has a gargantuan lead, to just like take the fight and end up getting a few kills and then getting the Fire Giant instead of just getting the Fire Giant. Typically as soon as you get that Fire Giant though, if you don't take that fight, everybody needs to back instantly. And you need to try and get Pyro if you can, because if you back and you don't get Pyro, the enemy team is going to walk up and get it. But most importantly, the biggest mistake I do see a lot of lower level players make is that they get the Fire Giant and they don't back and spend gold and group for a siege. Like one person will like walk over here and they'll get mids, and then they'll walk over to mid wave and then they'll just get picked and they'll die. And it's like, well darn, that there's your assassin or mage's Fire Giant, and now the siege is going to be really difficult because they don't have that damage, they don't have that damage buff, they don't have that HP regen for if they get poked, So most importantly, just make sure you're on the same page as your team. Make sure that you're backing all at the same time. And yeah, that's pretty much it. If you guys have any questions or any comments, recommendations, what I should do for next vids, please let me know down in the comments sections. I appreciate you guys subscribing to my channel and watching and hanging out. I'm going to do a lot more videos like this because I think that there's a lot of information that doesn't get covered on YouTube. That's very important stuff like this, because like I said, Fire Giant fights are the most important part, if not one of them. Important part of a conquest game. They can make or break a team's win or loss. So yeah, like I said, thank you guys so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and I will get more videos out like this. Thank you guys so much. Have a beautiful day.